let's jump right into today's explainer because we are unpacking a really fascinating, deeply emotional, faith-based address about what it truly means to be a father. The source material from this Father's Day presentation absolutely challenges us to rethink the very foundation of male mentorship. It goes way, way beyond those typical feel-good greeting card sentiments we're all used to.
But before we get into the specifics of what the speakers actually said, I want you to just take a second and think about this. Is fatherhood literally just a matter of biology? Or is it something much deeper? Like, is it something that simply happens the moment a child is born? Or is it a very specific, honed skill set? To answer that, we're going to explore this material through 5 main themes today: a title versus an assignment, calling out the men, the rented daddy phenomenon, the father of lights, and finally, leaving a proud legacy. So, let's dive in. Starting off with our first theme, a title versus an assignment. Right out of the gate, the first speaker, Father Godwin, completely shatters the baseline definition of fatherhood. He heavily emphasizes the stark difference between the sheer biological fact of being a male, which is just a title, versus possessing the actual skill set to father a child, which he calls the assignment. Because think about it, while many men can biologically bring children into the world, very few actively possess the skills to be a father. It's not something you just passively acquire overnight. It's a profound active responsibility. Building on that idea, the speakers draw on the biblical terminology of Abba. They define it not just as a casual name or greeting, but as an active job description. And Abba is a source, a nourisher, a protector, and a defender. It's this overarching role of guidance and provision that requires highly intentional effort and, honestly, continuous learning. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that this assignment isn't private. It's not locked behind closed doors. It relies heavily on cultural values, where the community collectively shares the burden of raising children. The speaker actually highlights a specific Nigerian cultural perspective where a child belongs not just to their immediate parents, but to the entire community. Basically, every child you see is the responsibility of all the fathers who have stepped up to take on that assignment. Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, calling out the men. To really illustrate this, the speaker uses this incredible documentary metaphor about Serengeti elephants to show the chaotic societal results of a fatherless youth. Researchers found that when young elephants lose the older males, the head of the clan, they literally grow up to be dysfunctional elephants. The speakers use this observation from nature to underscore a core belief that older men are absolutely essential to, quote, call forth the maturity and manhood in younger boys. And this metaphor is powerfully anchored by a real-world anecdote from the source material about a young nephew named Daniel. Now, Daniel traveled to Abuja chasing what he thought was a lucrative job, only to realize he'd been locked in a compound as part of a scam. He was totally paralyzed by fear. His aunt spent hours trying to placate the situation via text, but nothing changed. Not until her pastor, an older male authority figure, took the phone and firmly commanded Daniel to get up from that place now and leave. It was literally only that specific authoritative male voice that broke his paralysis. To further cement this societal role, the source references ancient traditions, specifically historical Jewish culture. Back then, public validation from a father was strictly required to activate a son's societal standing. A father would take his son to the city gates, present him to the other men, and officially authorize him to do business, wearing the father's signet ring. It was a formal, very public calling out into maturity. Okay, moving to Section 3. And honestly, this is the most emotionally resonant theme of the entire explainer: the rented daddy phenomenon. Introduced by Pastor Olum Olu, this concept of the rented daddy is where the theoretical assignment of fatherhood hits stark, heartbreaking reality. He tells the story of a young schoolgirl who contacted him entirely out of the blue. She asked him to step in as her father for a school event just so she wouldn't be the only child without a dad present. And he did it. He showed up, navigating all the awkwardness with her mother, simply to fulfill that desperate need for a father figure on that one specific day. What we're seeing here is the profound emotional gap left by absence. It creates this massive social vulnerability that children desperately try to mask. The source material notes how cruel school environments can be, right? Kids will quickly point out, hey, you don't have a daddy. And the fear of that shame is so intense that a child will literally rent a father figure for a few hours just to feel a sense of normalcy and protection among their peers. Another really vivid anecdote proves this void is rarely about money. The pastor recounts another story of a 15-year-old girl who called him just to ask, "Can I call you daddy?" Now, the catch here? She was already receiving a comfortable $50,000 monthly allowance from a foundation. She did not need financial support. Even fully funded children crave the specific emotional anchor and identity that the title Daddy provides. It's a deep psychological need.
The pastor drives this home by looking at his own life. He actually had a wealthy biological father who bought him cars, paid for holidays abroad, the whole shebang. But when it came to a true sense of security, that wasn't what he remembered. He recounts a severe medical crisis on a Saturday morning where he had to be rushed to the hospital. His deepest sense of safety came from simply resting his head on his Uncle T's lap during that frantic car ride. That physical, stable reassurance, that is the true essence of the daddy role.
This brings us to Section 4, the Father of Lights, which lays out the theological framework for all of this. Drawing neutrally from the biblical text of James 1:17, the speakers outline an explicit checklist of traits that men are mandated to bring to their communities. Interpreting the Father of Lights, who has no variation or shadow of turning, they say that men must be entirely stable, steadfast, dependable, and reliable. Basically, you have to be unchanging, even under immense pressure. And they strongly contrast the weakness of seeking external validation against the immense strength required to provide stability. They warn against men who crumble and seek outside affirmation just to feel like a man. True fatherhood is about being that steady, unwavering foundation. The pastor specifically mentions that a wife and children are literally going to rest their weight on the father's shoulders, meaning he has to be strong enough not to buckle under it. Finally, let's look at Section 5, leaving a proud legacy. What happens when this is done right?
Well, the speaker's ultimate prayer for the men in the audience beautifully encapsulates this goal. He says, "May everyone and anyone that calls you daddy become the object of your pride." It shifts the entire focus from the heavy burden of the assignment to the absolute joy and reward of watching a whole generation thrive because of your mentorship. And the pastor lists these amazing, tangible outcomes as proof. He talks about mentees walking the streets of DC with him, giving him a $5,000 cut of a successful investment just to honor him. He talks about proudly introducing an adopted son, Dr. Corey, and boasting about his PhD. He even mentions guiding a younger mentee pastor through big relationship choices. These are proof that stepping in as a rented daddy pays off in lifelong, incredibly proud relationships. Because ultimately, it all comes down to a simple, universal plea. The speaker describes a video where a grown son simply looks into the camera and says, "Dad, I hope you are proud of me." It really highlights that no matter how old or how successful we get, that desire for paternal validation remains a massive driving force in our lives. To wrap up this explainer, I want you to take this concept of fatherhood as a community assignment and apply it to your own life. We've seen just how vital stability, guidance, and a simple, steady presence can be to a young person. So ask yourself, who in your environment right now might be silently hoping for that steadfast presence? Something to think about. Thanks so much for tuning in and keep exploring.